Good evening and welcome to the public meeting for draft plan of subdivision, draft plan of condominium, and zoning bylaw amendment applications for 9 and 11 Kerman Avenue. Before we begin, I would like to provide the land acknowledgement. Niagara Region and Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wendourong, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and the town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. The premise of this public meeting is to provide the opportunity for the public to provide input on the proposed application. I would like to stress that there have been no decisions or recommendations made by council or planning staff on these applications. A previous open house for this application was held on Monday, January 10th, 2022. This meeting is conducted in accordance with the town's procedural bylaw. All participants are asked to conduct themselves with decorum and respect and provide the opportunity for all members of the public to express their opinion in an environment of tolerance on all points of view and free of intimidation. The intent is to create a venue to encourage people to participate in the process and provide their input. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Town of Grimsby to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Grimsby before the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is adopted, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Grimsby before the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is adopted, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal, unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party. With us this evening is Jared Marcus, IBI Group, planning staff in attendance, Adam Gignac, planner, and Walter Basic, Assistant Director of Planning. Tonight we will start with staff providing a brief presentation outlining the process and the application. Next, the consultant team will provide an overview of the proposal, and that will be followed by an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you have not already done so, please ensure you have signed in so you will be informed of future meetings on this proposal. As we navigate the virtual public meeting, we ask all participants for your patience. Each participant will be called in order and will be provided 10 minutes to speak. Each presenter may speak only once. If you hear your comment presented by someone else, please do not duplicate the remarks. All the comments are being recorded and will be taken into consideration. When you are called, we ask you to state your name and address. Persons addressing council should confine their remarks to the business at hand and shall direct their comments or questions to the chair. Staff are taking notes of all the questions asked this evening. At the end of the delegations, the consultant will be asked to respond to all the questions and comments raised. If you feel your questions have not been responded to this evening, you can email our planning department at planning@grimsby.ca. Adam, go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Gignac, and I'm a planner working for the town. I just wanted to thank you all for taking the time out of your schedules tonight for this public meeting for a proposed zoning bylaw amendment, draft plan of subdivision, and draft plan of condominium applications proposed for the properties at 9 and 11 Kerman Avenue. So just to begin this meeting, I'll be going through this brief presentation, providing all of you with some insight into the planning process for this application, and to briefly introduce what is proposed for the site. We have Jared Marcus from IBI Group here, who's also here to provide some greater details about the application. And following his presentation, there'll be time to ask any questions or provide any comments or concerns that you may have about the application. So the purpose of tonight's meeting, we'd like to provide you all with an overview of the planning process for each of these types of applications. So this includes the process from start to finish and where exactly the town is in this process. So an overview of the policy and regulatory framework shall also be provided, including the relevant official plan policies and zoning regulations in place. Agency feedback has been provided and will be touched upon. And Mr. Marcus will provide you with some additional details about the proposal. And finally, we're here to answer some questions that you may have and gather additional feedback. So all this feedback would be taken into consideration and identify any potential revisions needed for the proposal. So just to go over the Planning Act, the Planning Act is the authority is provided to submit applications for development plans that may not meet the current official plan or zoning bylaw. The town's role in this is to process these applications that come in. These applications are only able to amend the official plan or zoning bylaw if it is determined that the proposed changes comply with the overall intent of the official plan, and the result of these changes is that development is compatible with the surrounding neighborhoods. So before you is a flowchart that outlines some of the major milestones in the planning process. So for an application for a zoning bylaw amendment, draft plan of subdivision, and draft plan of condominium, they all begin with a pre-consultation meeting with town staff and other relevant agencies such as the Niagara Escarpment Commission or the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, Region of Niagara, etc. So this meeting, when it occurred, outlined the requirements that an applicant would need to submit for an official application submission. So the pre-consultation meeting for 911 Kerman Avenue was held over the course of the summer of 2021. So once an application is ready, the applicant submits the required documents and fees to the town for the town to review for completion. Upon the completion, a notice is sent out and agencies are asked for comments. Comments can also be provided for the first submission, or comments have been provided for the first submission for this proposal, with comments on the second submission still ongoing. The public was also able to provide comments at this time and can continue to do so until a decision on the application is made. So for this application, any documents related to the proposal are posted on the current planning applications webpage on the town's website. And all notices for public meetings are also posted in this location. So we are currently at the statutory public meeting stage, which provides an opportunity for comments to be made about the application. At this stage, initial agency and public comments have been made, with revisions potentially being done at this stage. Any revision would have been made to the application to address any concerns from agencies, town staff, or members of the public. So the open house identified some comments which have been included in the second submission, which Jared will go over shortly. And the open house for this proposal was held on January 10th, 2022. So following the public meeting, if all of the concerns about the proposal are believed to have been met, staff will prepare a recommendation report for council regarding the application. A decision on the application would be made at a future council meeting with the opportunity to appeal the decision afterwards. So the planning process is an open process, so it does allow the public to have a say in the process. This public meeting is one of the opportunities to give your opinion on this application. Additionally, you can write a letter or email addressed to the planning department to provide comments, and this email is planning@grimsby.ca. You can also send a copy of your letter or email to your counselors as an alternative. The public meeting is not the last opportunity to provide comments, and comments will continue to be accepted until the staff recommendation report is prepared. And to stay informed about the application, you're invited to provide your mailing address to the planning department. By doing so, you'd receive notice of any future meetings, information on how to obtain a staff report, information regarding speaking in front of the committee or council, should you wish to, or information on how you can appeal an application. So just to move on to briefly introduce the proposal, this slide shows the preliminary proposed draft plan of subdivision. This proposal has been modified since the open house, which will be discussed by Jared shortly. The application is for the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment to create 44 new residential lots on the existing properties, 2 of which have single detached dwellings proposed and the other 42 having semi-detached dwellings proposed. The proposed zoning would be amended from residential detached 1 and neighborhood development to residential detached 1 RD 125 and residential multiple 1. A common element condominium road is proposed to run through the site. So to briefly outline the official plan policies in place, so 911 Kerman are identified as a low density residential area. So the policies for this designation are located in section 342 of the official plan. This designation permits a mixture of residential uses, including single detached dwellings. It's considered to be located in a stable residential neighborhood, but does allow for limited development, evolution, and rejuvenation. The maximum height permitted in this designation is 2.5 stories. As stated earlier, the current zoning designation on the properties are residential detached 1 and neighborhood development. The RD1 zone permits a range of residential uses and 15% maximum lot coverage existing. The ND zone permits the buildings on site as existing. The proposed zoning is residential detached 1 with lot coverages of 25% and residential multiple 1. One dwelling will contain the RD1 zoning, with the remaining 43 having the RM1 zoning. There are also proposed modified performance standards for lot coverage, minimum exterior side yard, minimum interior side yard, minimum rear yard, minimal accessible parking space dimensions, and the garage width percentage of building. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Up next, we have Jared Marcus. Jared, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. Just give me a moment to find and share my screen. All right, I hope you can all see the screen now.
Yes, we can see it.
Great, thank you. So thank you, Mr. Gignac, for the introduction to the project and the process. My name is Jared Marcus. I am a planner with IBI Group. I've been here with the firm for about 17 years now, so some here on council should be familiar with me. We're representing Tarbit Construction Limited, who are the owners and applicant for a project that we're calling Evergreen Estates. Jumping right in, the first slide up just gives you a general community context for where the subject lands are. You can see them outlined in red here in the middle of your screen. For context, Livingston Avenue runs across the top of your screen. Kerman runs top to bottom, just to the right-hand side of the subject lands. Main Street West along the bottom of the screen. Then Linden Lane and Sumac Court run just to the west of the property. Generally, the property is surrounded by all residential developments with the exception of the Blessed Trinity Catholic Secondary School. There is a mix of age and type of singles. You have some newer subdivisions here on Linden Lane, and then the large lot development that's typical of Main Street, and then some older suburban subdivisions to the east. Next slide up just shows the general context of the subject property in a little more detail. You can see that the majority of the subject lands were covered by a greenhouse. That greenhouse, most people have likely seen, has been demolished or relocated to another property within the municipality where it will be re-erected and business starting again. Otherwise, you have a single detached dwelling here on fronting on Kerman on the east, and another single detached dwelling more centrally located. The subject lands are fairly secluded from the surrounding property due to mature cedar hedgerows along the perimeter on the northwest and along the southeast boundaries, and some mature vegetation in the middle of the property. Currently, the property has a driveway access from Kerman and a driveway access from Main Street. Next couple images just show you the context of what you would see of the property currently, or not currently because that greenhouse is gone, but what Street View shows you from the street. So on the top left, you have if you're looking from Main Street looking north, that's a laneway access to the old greenhouse. Middle image is a view of the existing dwelling from Kerman Avenue. And the final image is if you were at the court on Sumac and looking east at the end of Sumac and the former greenhouses. As Mr. Gignac noted, the property is within the low density residential area designation. Zoning is RD1 0.15 on the property on Kerman, the remainder being neighborhood development. And as Mr. Gignac might have noted, designation permits singles, semis, up to a maximum of 2.5 stories in height and a maximum density of 25 units per hectare. And the zoning permits a single detached dwelling and the existing uses. And of course, the applications that are before you tonight are a zoning bylaw amendment, draft plan of subdivision, and draft plan of common element condominium applications. Mr. Gignac touched on this as well. This is just the application chronology for how we got to where we are today. Way back in March 18th, 2021, we attended a pre-consultation application with a first submission that fall. There was an open house in January of this year, and following that was our second submission in August. And now we're here at a public meeting in September, and we're hopeful that following this, we'll be able to address any minor remaining comments and hopefully be in front of this in front of committee and council later this year or early next. As I noted, we did attend that open house meeting in January, and this slide just summarizes very high level what we heard from the residents. There were some concerns about engineering generally, applying to what is typical with urban infill, which is concerns about water drainage and changes to the lot, which are going to impact adjacent developments, as well as general concerns about where the servicing from this development is going to go. There were also concerns about neighborhood connectivity that applied to both pedestrian realm as well as appropriate site entrance accesses. There were concerns about neighborhood character, whether singles and semis could coexist harmoniously. In our opinion, they do, of course. Concerns about traffic volumes that applied to both existing traffic speed, safety concerns on Kerman Avenue, as well as concerns with potential or nuisance or safety concerns from the increase that would be a result of this development. And lastly, there were a few concerns about the development design in general, and we'll go through some of the changes that have resulted from those comments at the open house as well as staff comments. So first slide here, you see this was what we presented to the open house back in January. This was our first submission. You'll note that there were 3 single detached dwellings, 2 up here facing Kerman, 1 on the south side of Sumac Court, 44 single semi-detached dwellings within the internal project. Of course, you had the Sumac Court extension, which would take what is a substandard cul-de-sac and turn that into a cul-de-sac that meets municipal standards, and a private condominium road which connected from Kerman Avenue to Sumac Court and looping back on itself, and as well as 20 private visitor parking spaces within the development. That resulted in a net density of approximately 22 units per hectare. So hearing all the comments that came out of that open house, receiving staff comments, we went back to the drawing board. We made some revisions where it made sense, but by and large, the development remains similar or the same as what you would have seen at that January meeting. So the biggest changes you'll see now are that there are only 2 single detached dwellings where previously there were 3. So we have removed one of the semi-detached lots here and one of the singles and merged that as one large lot, which will be much more consistent and in character with the development that already exists on Kerman Avenue. You'll note that there are now 42 semi-detached units within the internal. That's because we removed one semi-detached unit to create this large lot. Sumac Court extension still remains as it is, and the private condo road still connects from Kerman to Sumac and loops in on itself. And as well, even with that's going to happen a few times tonight. Even with the Lawson unit, we have kept the parking ratio the same at 20 visitor parking spaces. So that ends up with a net density of 20.6 units. So Revised scheme is much the same, but some of these changes do address the concerns that were raised at the public meeting. The next slide goes in a little closer in detail. What I talked about initially was a removal of 2 semi-detached and 1 single-detached, and that creates this larger single-detached lot facing to Kerman Avenue. Another concern that was heard at the public meeting, or at the open house rather, was the functionality of Sumac Court, the number of entrances, the number of driveways. So we have made some minor changes to driveway locations. You'll note 13 and 42. We've changed those driveway locations so that there's less conflict. But the biggest change was lots 43 and 44. They were originally oriented towards Sumac Court, so squeezing 2 driveways into this small space. Those have been reoriented so that they face the street, or face the private road now rather than the street. So instead of 2 driveways, there'll be a larger landscaped area adjacent to that street. And as a result of reorienting those units, we lost a couple parking spaces. Those have been relocated to the central amenity / stormwater management space in the more centrally in the development. Lastly, there was a concern about pedestrian connectivity. So we've extended that sidewalk from private development continuously to the existing sidewalk on Sumac Courts. That would be a municipal sidewalk owned and maintained by the municipality, but constructed through this development. Next slide up just shows you the detailed site plan drawing. These are hard to see in these meetings, so I like to rely on the colored images to give that flavor. The next image up is the draft plan of subdivision. The main changes from the draft plan of subdivision mimic the changes to that I just went through. We have now 1 large single detached lot at the front, and these 2 lots, 43 and 44, now face the street. But otherwise, the draft plan of subdivision is virtually the same as what was presented back in January. So we have 44 freehold lots for semis and singles, 1 block for common element condominium, which encompasses the road, the visitor parking, the services, the sidewalks, etc. That's all owned and operated by a future condominium corporation. And then, of course, we have the Street A shown here, which is the Sumac Court extension. You can kind of see the outline of the existing court now, so there'd be a new paved court there. Next slide shows the draft plan of condominium. As I noted just a moment ago, that would be the road, visitor parking, services, sidewalk, etc. The only change to the condominium is really reflected here where the reorientation of lots 43 and 44 are. Next slide shows you the servicing scheme for the subdivision. If you noted the very large delay between open house and comments and resubmission, that delay was really a factor of trying to investigate an alternate stormwater servicing scheme for the project. The original scheme proposed internal collection of all the storm water into a tank. You'll see that here in the middle. That tank outlets to Kerman Avenue, and the existing storm sewer would have to be upgraded to handle that. We spent a considerable amount of time discussing with the town and with the Catholic School Board to try and find a solution that would allow this to go through an existing easement. But unfortunately, those discussions have not been fruitful, and so we've had to revert back to the original proposal to keep the project moving. In red on the screen, you'll see is the sanitary sewer. That's the exact same layout as before. It's all connected internally, and then outlets to the existing sewers on Sumac, which would go down outlet externally to the west. There are no upgrades needed within Sumac Street for Sumac Court for that. And green is the water main. The water main would move from Kerman to Sumac and internally, and again, no upgrades there as well. Next slide shows you the vegetation management plan. This is the same version that was submitted in the first application. It hasn't been revised because regardless of lot orientation, the results are the same. Majority of the vegetation internally would be impacted by development. Currently, a lot of the exterior vegetation is proposed for removal, but our client will be working with the engineer, town staff, and neighbors to find a solution where either trees are retained or new buffer trees are planted to ensure there's no incompatibility between uses. Next slide just shows the proposed architectural design. There are, I want to say, 8 or 9 variations. There's a bunch of different designs. There are 2 stories. There are 1 stories, 1 story with loft. There's different widths of units proposed within this development. So there's a bunch of different variations on design. So there won't be a homogeneous design in here. There will be a lot of variety of materials, variety of styles, variety of colors. So it should be a very visually pleasing development. Again, this is just the contextual rendering again, just to reorient before we move to the next batch of slides, which cover the zoning bylaw amendment. You'll have heard from Mr. Neck and myself. The proposal is rezoning from RD1 to RD1.25 for the single detached dwelling at the front, and RM1 55 for the remainder of the development. So the first slide here shows the proposed modifications for the RD1 zone. That's for the single lot facing on Kerman Avenue. You'll note in red where the modifications are proposed, 25% where the parent zone doesn't include a percentage, 14.5 meter front yard where our analysis showed that a 19.2 meter setback was required, a 4.5 meter setback from an exterior side yard. An exterior side yard in this case applies only to the internal private condominium road, and then a 2.6 meter interior side yard where 3 is required, the other metrics being met. So this slide just shows where that would apply. You'd have the interior side yard here, the exterior side yard here facing the condominium road, and then a plus or minus 15 meter yard facing the street, and that would be for proposed side of the dwelling. And these are not set in stone building plans, but this is the schematic layout that the owner is working with at current. Next slide shows the proposed modifications to the RM1 zone. This would be for both the singles and the semis. You'll see in red here that we are adding a permitted use for a single detached dwelling. The current RM1 zone does not permit that. You'll note that maximum lot coverage, where there isn't a percentage proposed, we're proposing 55% for semi-detached dwellings and 45% for the lone single detached dwelling. Minimum front yard is 2.6, where 4.5 is proposed. Minimum exterior side yard, and again, this applies to the private condominium road. That's 1.0 meters for the semi and 2.0 meters for the single. And minimum rear yard depth, where 7.5 is required, we're proposing 6 for the 6 meters for bungalows, 7.5 meter for 2-story units for the semis, and a 6 meter rear yard for the lone single detached dwelling. What's not noted here is that there are also modifications, required for barrier-free parking. This is to make those parking spaces consistent with what is required by the AODA, which is a provincial act, as well as modifications for garage width facing a street. So each of these units is proposed to have a 2-car garage, and so that garage width increases beyond the 50% that's permitted by the zoning bylaw. You'll see here these other ones. There's a exterior side yard for the single detached dwelling here, rear yard for the bungalow townhouses here, as well as the single, And in these locations, this is where the front yard setback pinches for the semi-detached units. Otherwise, most of the development will meet that minimum requirement. It's just these areas, and you can see here on the image, just to the right-hand side here, that's where the pinch point becomes. Because of that radius to facilitate a fire truck, we do have a couple units where you have pinch points for minimum front yard and minimum side yard. So the town's interpretation of the front yard setback was perpendicular to this radius instead of an extension of that lot line. So it's a little more technical in nature. That we still have an appropriate setback of 6 meters for all units for the garage, and most of the units here would have that minimum requirement for front yard setback. It's just a couple pinch points units, but currently we're applying that broadly to the development. So whether that needs to be fine-tuned with staff is a discussion that would come after this. And so that's the last of my submission to you tonight. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to hang around and answer those.
Thank you very much, Jared. Now we open up to members of the public. First up, Paul Phelps. Welcome, Paul. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Jordan. I just want to get my video started again here, just a sec. Thank you. Can everybody see me and hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so good evening, Mayor Jordan and councilors. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Paul Phelps. My wife and I live at 17 Kerman Avenue, and we also own the single vacant lot at 15 Kerman Avenue, where we intend to build a house at some time in the future. We've reviewed the updated submission and proposed project, including the responses to our comments and some of the agency comments from the open house in January. And we're certainly not opposed to the proposed development in general, and we thank Mr. Tarbett and his consultants for addressing a number of the public comments and agency comments, including ours. However, we still do have 3 concerns which we've raised previously, and I would just like to highlight again tonight. And maybe if Mr. Marcus, is it possible for you to put a couple slides up that you had up before, or is that going to be difficult? A picture's worth 1,000 words, but if you could go to the civil design sketch that you had. Our first concern is about that's the one right there. Thank you very much. The proposed amenity space. We believe it'd be much better to have that amenity space, which is shown, kind of has a blue border around it there. We believe it'd be much better to have it between lot 1 and 2 instead of between lots 3 and 4. So to move it to the east, that would provide a much better buffer between the semi-detached proposed units and the single-family homes on Kerman Avenue, including our lot. In the consultant's response matrix, it's noted that that would be a concern because it wouldn't line up with the swale that's in the Blessed Trinity property behind. But if you look closely on this sketch there, that swale sort of runs behind our properties, parallel to the back of our properties, and just as it approaches the proposed development, it kind of turns to the west a little bit. It would be very easy to turn that because it's just quite a minor swale. It'd be very easy to relocate that and turn it a little bit to the east, and that would allow that amenity space to be moved over and provide a much better buffer. So we raised that comment previously at the open house, and we still feel that'd be a much better way to provide a good buffer. And I believe that can be done, and I'd be happy to meet with the applicant or their consultants to discuss that to discuss that further or with town staff. If, however, that proves to be impossible to do, and I don't think it would, but if it does prove impossible to do, I think the next best alternative would be to limit the height of the proposed semis on lot 2 and 3 to 1 story with a loft, and also to restrict windows above the ground floor not to face north or east, which is towards the single family homes on Kerman. And this is the exact solution that was used by Grimsby Council and staff in the legacy development on Central Avenue a few years ago, where there was R1 or RM1 zoning abutting existing R2 zoning. So it has been used by the town in the past to provide a good buffer between single family homes and higher density homes. But I really believe that just moving the amenity space would be a much better way to accomplish that. Second concern, and Mr. Marcus, if you could flip back or go to your vegetation management slide. That's the one right there. So as some of you know, and we actually provided comments to the town in March about this, all of that vegetation on the north side that starts at the back of our lot at 15 Kerman and runs to the west, all of that vegetation has now been removed. It was a large evergreen trees, and we feel it was very unfortunate. Those trees provided a beautiful and mature buffer between the greenhouse property and our properties and the other properties on Kerman Avenue. It's unfortunate that vegetation was removed. Those trees were removed before this development was approved. And certainly it would have been much better if that could have been communicated to us at the open house that was held back in January, because certainly we were under the impression that those trees were going to remain. I did speak to Mr. Tarbett about it, though, after the trees had come down, and he assured me that there would be new mature trees planted on the school property to provide proper screening between the redevelopment and our property. But I'm unsure now how that's going to happen. I don't think the town can control trees being planted on the school property. Not sure how that would happen and how they would be looked after. So I guess that really raises a question. I haven't seen in the resubmission any proposal for screening along there. So is that something that, that's a question, I guess, for Mr. Marcus. Is that something that is still in the works and is going to be worked into the plans, or what's the status of that? So I guess I guess you'll respond to that later, maybe. Okay, thank you. And my the third concern that we have is about the new storm sewer for the development. And we heard Mr. Marcus say that the developer has been unsuccessful in negotiating with the school board to try to run that new sewer down through the Blessed Trinity property, which would have been, much better for everybody, so that Kerman Avenue doesn't have to be dug up again. As everybody on council knows, Kerman Avenue was completely repaved a couple of years ago after the new water mains were put in, and the road is now in great shape, and it's unfortunate that may have to be dug up again. It would be really nice if the town and the region could apply some leverage to the school board, and being the optimistic guy that I am, it would be nice if that solution could still be investigated and something could be done there. And I kind of throw that out to town staff and council to think about that. But if it's impossible and Kerman is going to have to be dug up all the way from the development down to Livingston Avenue, in the proposal it says that that the road is going to be repaved. And of course, my question is, I assume that means the entire width of Kerman is going to be repaved, not just the sewer trench, because then the road will just be back in the shape of before. So that ends my my comments, my three concerns. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions or clarify anything if anybody wants to ask me a question. Otherwise, I'll submit these comments in writing to staff later this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Up next, we have Dee Roberts. All right, it doesn't appear that Dee Roberts is available. Up next, Greg Smith. Greg?
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can, Greg. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Greg Smith, and my wife and I live at 242 Main West. And actually, our driveway access is on Kerman, and we've been here for just over 27 years. And looking over the revised proposal, and hearing Mr. Marcus's comments about the changes, the concerns that we have really haven't been addressed in the revised proposal. So the first, and it's more general about the proposal itself, but shoehorning 44 homes into that small area will irrevocably alter the character of the street. And as it exists now, Kerman Avenue has a mix of new, mid-century, and century homes, single family dwellings for the most part. When I was out walking this morning, I counted 31 between Main Street West and Livingston. And the proposed development would more than double the number of homes that are accessing Kerman Avenue, and brand new homes that all look the same. So I think that's sort of an imbalance in the character of what exists now and what existed in the past. It follows that more than doubling the number of homes also doubles the number of cars, and there are double car garages in the new proposal that would be possibly accessing Kerman Avenue. And this brings me to our second concern. And that is that the effect the development will have on traffic on the street. And I'm in a little bit of a different situation in that, we're at the corner of Main West and Kerman. We're on the east side of Kerman. But it used to be it is a short, quiet street. However, more than doubling the number of vehicles that could access Kerman will change that for the worse. And there's both a traffic problem and a speed problem on Kerman Avenue and Main Street West. And recently, over the summer, speed marshalling pylons were added about halfway down Kerman. And they've really had no visible effect on the amount of traffic traveling on the street, nor the speed at which the vehicles are traveling. They've had to be replaced once that I know of, and they bear the marks of being hit by vehicles, or maybe one vehicle several times. The speed of the cars moving along Main Street West is another big problem, despite the 50-kilometer-an-hour speed limit. And there was a single car accident recently at our place, in front of our place there in Kerman Avenue. Vehicle traveling east on Main West, turned onto Kerman, lost control of the vehicle, mounted the curb in front of our property, traveling approximately 100 feet across our lawn and the lawn at 2 Kerman Avenue, damaging some trees and some garden bushes. It's a significant distance. It was a warm day, no rain, no ice, no snow. Similar accidents have also happened in the past. The sound of squealing tires, honking horns, rattling trailers, and whooshing of large trucks is constant now. There are no stop signs along Highway 8 between Mountain and Casablanca, and the traffic proceeds along there at a sometimes frightening clip. I've noticed little or no effort to control this as well. On just last week, or on September 16th, 2 poles were sheared off at the ground along Highway 8 there, just down from us and down from the proposed development. Luckily, it was early in the morning. There seemed to be no injuries. There's a lot of foot traffic on Kerman. Folks walking their dogs, strolling with their children, joggers, walkers, two high schools adjacent that use the street. The other day I was almost late for work because I had to wait for the phys ed students from one of the schools to jog past. There were a lot of them. They were moving at different speeds and they weren't all using the sidewalk. So the proposed development is being marketed to young families with children, according to the billboards that are up there. And the children living in the proposed development will need to be nimble and good at dodging cars. Short of scrapping the proposed development altogether, we see no advantage to the neighborhood to have the vehicular access to Kerman Avenue. We feel the best solution is to change the walkway connection to the south side of the development that exists on Main Street or exists onto Main Street to a vehicular one. As shown in the plans provided, the walkway is wide enough to accommodate the vehicular traffic, and the walkway could then be moved to Kerman Avenue. In most of the development over the last 25 years that's occurred between Kerman and Main West, Casablanca and Livingston, the access is directly onto Main Street West or Livingston. Moving vehicular access away from Kerman Avenue eases the effect on such a small street. I'm not sure of the timeline of the construction. I saw that it was sort of scheduled to begin at summer 2023, but the duration of the construction is also a concern, including the removal of fill, and it will be a disruptive force in the lives of the people living on Kerman. A friend of mine once said that when the asphalt goes down, it doesn't come up again. And the impact of both the proposed development and any access to our historic street will have immediate and long-lasting effects that aren't easy to reverse. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Up next, we have Eric Willems. Good evening, Eric. All right, seeing Eric's not there, we have a number of questions. I guess that'll be led by Adam, Jared, and maybe Jim. So go ahead, Adam first, I guess. If not Adam, Jared, you go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jordan. I'm happy to jump in and make a couple comments there. Freshest in my mind is the previous speaker speaking to some of their immediate concerns with the development. Professionally, I don't think this is shoehorning. We're talking about a density of just 20 units per hectare. That's pretty low density, whether that's semis or singles. That's, to be honest, on the bottom end of any kind of density you're going to see in greenfield or intensification. So it's I don't think it's shoehorning. I don't think the development's not compatible. Speaking to traffic and safety, I don't. The city, or excuse me, the town, region, no one asked for a traffic study. That's because 40 units is a minor infill to the neighborhood. It's not going to create adverse impacts on the street, whether there's traffic safety or speed problems on the street, whether that's signalization at the intersection. Those are broader questions that sound like they need to be addressed by town council and regional and with regional staff more broadly than this development. Duration of construction is most definitely going to cause an impact. That goes without saying, really. There is going to be an impact from this development. There's going to be an impact from all development. We look at whether there's going to be an adverse impact in the long term. We think the addition of these units is a net benefit to the community and to the town as a whole. regarding the original speaker's comments, I do recall those comments from the original round. We did look at it with our engineer, and they advised us to leave it where it was. So if there are minor changes to that swale, as we've noted, we are trying to further discussions with the school board, and it's most definitely our favorite option for servicing. So if there's any way that can happen, we'll be looking at it. Limiting heights, limiting windows, limiting overlook on developments. That's the original speaker is right. We do implement that in many developments. In this case, we're looking at a scenario where there is one unit that essentially lines up. The side yard on the one side of the unit would line up with the rear yard of the vacant lot that the speaker owns. Professionally, I don't think there's an incompatibility there, but I'm happy to circle back with the owner of the development and talk about making or implementing some of these changes. As far as vegetation goes, I wasn't involved in those, so I'd have to defer to the property owner. I believe he may be in attendance in person with you tonight, so he may want to speak to some of those things. But looking at my notes, I believe that's most of it.
Thank you, Jared. Seeing no other questions or comments, thank you for your participation in the public meeting. The consultants and staff will take back your feedback. Please contact staff at planning@grimsby.ca if you have any additional comments or questions about the proposal after this evening. The meeting is now closed. Good evening, everyone. Have a good evening. Good night.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan.